Good evening and welcome everyone. I hope you can all hear me. According to the clock up there, it's 7 o'clock, which it probably isn't. It's probably 6 o'clock, but we're in Wheelie.
It's somewhere.
Yeah. So good evening, welcome. I'll get cracking with the agenda. We've got quite a lot to get through tonight. First item is apologies for absence and substitutions. I've got apologies from Councillor Land and Councillor Platt, and I've got Councillor Skills Jr. subbing for Councillor Land, Councillor Ferguson. I wonder where you've gone, Tanya. Substituting for Councillor Platt. And welcome to everyone else. Looks like we've got a full house otherwise. Item 2 is the minutes of the last meeting, which was held on the 12th of June. Can I agree those as true and accurate record of the meeting?
So moved.
Yeah, we're happy with that. Thanks, I'll sign those. Declarations of interest, item 3, councillors are invited to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or other interest and the nature of it relating to any item on the agenda. I would declare that I am a director of the Garden Communities, North Essex Garden Communities Limited. Carlo.
Likewise, Chairman, I'm an alternate director on the Garden Communities.
Declarations of interests. I'm declaring that I am a director of North Essex Garden Communities Limited. Did you indicate, Ivan? Sorry.
Whether it matters, I think it's good to be on the record, but I'm a member of the committee, the Regulation and Development Committee at Essex County Council.
Yep, thanks very much.
In that case, Chairman, I do chair that committee as well. I don't think we'd be touching on that, but just for the sake of clarity and transparency.
Okay. I'll move on to the next item. Public speaking. Page 9 to 12. So, there are no questions submitted, but I've got statements from Richard Everett, John Smith Day and Carol Bannister. So we'll kick off with Richard. I think you know what to do.
Thank you. I'll pass those around. Thank you, Chairman. I've given a copy of my speech so that all of you have it, because it's got some weighty detail within it. Thank you. I'm speaking to the committee today as I cannot agree with the suggestion in this report that we can no longer demonstrate a 5-year housing supply. I offer evidence here that 102% of the 5-year supply can be demonstrated, i.e. 5.1 years supply. The report makes suggestions that refute some of the initial calculations agreed by this committee in June, and the report further concludes that the Council can only demonstrate a 4.6-year housing land supply. There is a fundamental democratic principle at stake here. This committee took a view on housing land supply back in June. Add to the fact that the Council is currently seeking leave to challenge in the High Court one of the recent planning inspector's decisions and is taking legal advice on challenging the second. There was nothing wrong with that decision back in June, so unless and until the courts rule otherwise, we should stick to our guns. It is utter madness to undermine your own position prior to appearance in the High Court. It is tantamount to giving in before you've started, not a sensible course of action in the least. In fact, I would go further. It is directly challenging the right of elected members to determine policy. Councillors of this authority have made a decision to declare a 5-year supply, and irrespective of whether others agree with it, it is the members' decision to take, not anyone else's. Secondly, the method of calculation of the supply is flawed by not including, and not limited to, local plan allocations in the supply. The report says, and I quote, "In June 2017, the Council had not included within its 5-year calculation any homes in the draft local plan. There is case law, the St Modwin judgment, that says councils can include such sites so as long as they can demonstrate with evidence that they are genuinely expected to deliver homes within 5 years. I will now outline the evidence that says exactly that, and yet these allocations are still not included in the supply." Legal background. In the St Modwin High Court judgment at paragraph 21 of the ruling, Ousley J. stated, "The planning judgment as to deliverability can clearly be made in respect of sites which do not have planning permission now, but can reasonably be expected to receive it, so as to enable housing to be built on them within the next 5 years. These would include allocations in an emerging local plan once assessed for the purposes of inclusion in the housing land supply, or indeed in an adopted plan. It is therefore quite demonstrable that this report's estimation of housing supply simply underestimates the true position. It is my opinion that the Council could and should demonstrate a 5.1-year housing supply, utilising the methodology allowed by the St Modwen judgment. Proposed local plan allocation sites. The deliverable supply should include a number of proposed allocations that are already being progressed through the development process and which it is envisaged could deliver new homes during the next 5 years. These sites should be included because there is an expressed interest from the landowner to sell the land for development, or a developer builder intends to submit a planning application in the near future. The Rouse's Farm development in Clacton is included in the local plan. There have been pre-application discussions with the developer Persimmon, and there is an outline application going through the planning process as we speak. This application is for some 950 dwellings, giving a significant boost to the housing supply. In addition, the Orchard Works site in Clacton and the Robinson Road site in Brightlingsea should also be included in the supply. I submit that inclusion of 60 to 90 dwellings to the supply would be appropriate for Rouse's Farm, 14 should be included for the Orchard Works site, and the whole of the remainder of the Robinson Road site, amounting to some 115 dwellings, be included. So, as we've already heard, the St Modwen judgment quite clearly states, referring to footnote 11 of the NPPF, that sites that are deliverable should be included. Small sites. The report's calculation for small sites in the housing supply has applied a further 20% discount or contingency to the 974 dwellings with permission on small sites. This calculation therefore identifies 770 dwellings on small windfall sites would be achievable over the 5-year period. However, as we've already heard, the St Modwen judgment quite clearly states, referring to footnote 11 of the NPPF, that sites that are deliverable should be included. By reason of this, I contend that the full 974 dwellings be identified in the housing land supply. Housing land supply assessment, Table 1 details the report, and I've given that all to you. That's it. Thank you.
I'm quiet. Right, my next speaker is John Smith-Day. Good evening. I think you've done this before too, haven't you? So.
Indeed. Good evening. My name is John Smith-Day. I'm a resident of Little Clacton. Firstly, I would like to applaud the members and officers for their stance in challenging the Centenary Way decision and hopefully the Slabberys Lane decision too. I haven't had time to go through the vast amount of papers in great detail, but have a few thoughts as follows. Firstly, I deal with an assumption of logic. If you take it that the target numbers are too high, and I realise that's arguable, logically, therefore, the gap between the actual and the target increases. Market forces dictate the actual, and decisions based on what I consider doubtful statistics provide the target. The result is that the 5-year supply becomes more and more unattainable. My second point deals with a proverb, the end justifies the means. The Wiktionary description of the meaning of this proverb is that morally wrong actions are sometimes necessary to achieve morally right outcomes. Actions can only be considered morally right or wrong by virtue of the morality of the outcome. I would suggest that there is a fair degree of pressure within central government and the inspectors to increase housing delivery, which translates into approving planning applications at appeal and making it difficult for local authorities to agree a local plan at lower levels of objectively assessed need. The cynic within me wonders if the above proverb has been applied. The arguments in some appeal decisions appear to contradict other planning decisions and rules. Recent decisions in the Tendring district have shown that arguments in different appeals covering the same aspects of planning rules in similar circumstances have brought about differing results. For example, the green gap argument was successful in the Rush Green Road case, but not in the Centenary Way case. In the Slabberys Lane case, the 5-year supply was challenged. The calculation of this figure contains a number of assumptions and judgments, each of which I have no doubt has been considered in great detail by the officers in carrying out their work. I would suggest that they are likely to have a greater understanding of the matters involved in their own district than the inspector, and it is extremely unfortunate that he has overridden their professional approach and local knowledge. In particular, I do not believe that he has taken due consideration of the unattributable population change, the UPC element, of the objectively assessed need, OAN calculation, when commenting on the dwellings per annum, DPA figures. I appreciate that members and officers have to take account of the possibility of appeal costs when considering their decisions on planning applications, but get the feeling that the fear factor is being hammered home within decisions made at appeal. Thirdly, the Localism Act 2011. The first line of the Wikipedia article is copied below in the item passed around. The Localism Act 2011 is an Act of Parliament that changes the powers of local government in England. The aim of the Act is to facilitate the devolution of decision-making powers from central government control to individuals and communities. Recent appeal decisions and continuing challenges between central government, in the guise of inspectors, and local government, in the guise of members and officers, show that the underlying concept is not being adhered to, and local guidance, attitude and wishes are being ignored. Thank you.
Thank you, well done. Thanks, John. Carol Bannister. Good evening.
This is just a very short, off-the-cuff statement because I'm confused. I sent my letter back in July, and I thought the letters were going straight to the Independent Planning Inspector, and so I addressed it to the Independent Planning Inspector. Then I find that from looking at the agenda pack, and there was masses of it, I certainly haven't got through it all, I noticed that my letter, because I wrote it in a letter form, because going online and looking at all these policies online is beyond my brain now. And I'm very impressed with the way my letter was pulled apart and different sections were put by the different policies. It was done in a very professional way, and I applaud the people who did that. And I've seen they've done it with some other letters. However, some letters I find are in full somewhere there, but mine and a number of others aren't. And I feel there's some parts of my letter that aren't there. I then clicked on local plan elsewhere and found a copy of my letter, but that was on an area where they're still putting these letters on. So, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not convinced that my letter has actually gone in full to the planning inspector. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah. I think, Mrs. Bannister, what I'll do is I'll get somebody to write to you on that and just clarify exactly what the situation is, rather than go into it in detail now, if that's okay with you. You made a good point. I think we understood it clearly enough. So thanks for the public speakers there. I'll move on to item 5 on the agenda, which is the report of Head of Planning Services on the Garden Community Issues and Options Development Plan document, page 13. Kath, do you want to summarise this?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. As you say, this report is about the Tendring and Colchester Borders Garden Community Development Plan document. The principle of a garden community on the borders between Colchester and Tendring has been established through Section 1 of the local plan. So the local plan falls into two parts. Section 1 is the strategic part, which is identical for Tendring, Colchester and Braintree. And the Section 2 is the more local policies. So in Section 1, we've got policies about establishing garden communities. I should just say for information now, the whole plan has been submitted to government for inspection, and we're expecting the inspection, the examination on Section 1 to take place in the middle to late January. An examination on Section 2 will follow later in the year, and we don't know quite when yet. So we've got Section 1 examination early next year, followed by Section 2. So this plan will sit below the local plan. So the local plan is quite strategic, and this development plan document is a more detailed document which picks up one particular policy area, and that's the garden communities policy area. It will follow a very similar process to the development of the local plan itself. So it goes through the same stages of consultation, publication, identification of preferred options, preferred way forward of the councils involved, and finally this publication draft, which would be submitted to government again for examination. So it's a mirror sort of image of the local plan process. And once it's adopted, it will provide a set of strategies, a set of policies and proposals to guide the delivery of the garden community. So the issues and options stage is the part that we're asking members to consider this evening. So that's the very first stage of consultation, and it's about forming the initial vision, about looking at the broad issues. Okay. The development of the garden community is being guided by the North Essex Garden Communities Limited. So that's a limited company that's been established between the 4 authorities, the 3 districts, Braintree, Colchester and Tendring, as well as the County Council. And the idea is that these councils will act as lead developer. So it'll be more than controlling the development as local planning authorities. They'll have a much more active role to play. And that will help to ensure that infrastructure is delivered either first or alongside development, rather than having a lag following on from employment and particularly housing development. It will also ensure that transport, infrastructure, schools, health, leisure, and also critically stewardship arrangements for the ongoing maintenance and management of the community as a whole, and particularly those facilities, is there in perpetuity. So the consultation process itself is going to happen in the form of a document which is Appendix 1 to the report. So that's on page 21 onwards of your report. And it's divided up into various themes that mirror both the North Essex Garden Communities Charter, which has been developed between the authorities, and also the Town and Country Planning Association's principles for garden communities. And the concept framework that you see set out there, it gives both a sort of spatial portrait of the current thinking of how that development might happen, and also some principles around different sort of themes. The questions that are asked at this stage of consultation are purposely very broad. They're wide open, asking people, what do you think about this approach? Have you got different ideas? What's been missed? So the document is not a statement of where the councils think this is definitely going at the moment in detail. It's very much to encourage participation, to encourage ideas, so that everybody in the community can help to shape it going forward. And as the stages progress, then the councils will be able to sort of focus down and be clearer about exactly what is proposed, taking on board all of the feedback that comes back to them. So this is the issues and options stage. The following one would be preferred options, and then finally it would be submission, just like the local plan. It's important to say that we have to undertake a sustainability appraisal as well, an environmental assessment of the plan, and that's attached to this report at Appendix 2, so that starts on page 75. And there's a summary of the findings on page 161. It identifies many positives about the proposal as it stands at the moment, but also some areas that are currently unclear, and it makes recommendations about how those things can be sort of fleshed out and explored in more detail as the plan develops. So the consultation itself, officers are asking members to approve publication of this document for consultation, and for the consultation to start on the 13th of November, so that's very soon, and run through until early January. A bit longer than the statutory norm, but we obviously realise that we're going through the Christmas period, and it would be only fair to people to extend the period for that reason. There will be information available on our consultation portal, but also physical documents and some exhibitions held within the settlements closest to the proposals. So if I can take you back to the recommendations, Chair, on page 13 of the agenda. There are 3. The first one is that the committee agrees the Issues and Options Development Plan document for consultation to be published. Also that the associated sustainability appraisal and environmental assessment is published for consultation. And lastly, delegate authority to the head of planning to make minor revisions to the document. That's just to pick up things like typos, in case we spot anything before we actually hit print. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Kath. Nick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very happy to second that with one minor amendment, if I may. On number 3, delegates authority to the head of planning to make minor revisions to the document prior to publication, subject to the agreement of the chairman of this committee.
Okay, so you're moving that, Nick?
Yes, I am.
Carla, did you?
Yes, Chairman, I would like to second that. And this represents a huge amount of years of work that is now coming up to the nitty-gritty of where things are going to go, what's the community going to look like, what type of stewardship is going to be governing the site, how we're going to interact with our neighbours. There's going to be shared areas there with... So there's all these issues are now coming up to the surface, but this represents years and years and years of work. And I applaud the way that the 4 authorities have actually joined together and given a massive amount of time, resources and financial resources as well to that, to enable this to come about. Later in the agenda we'll be talking about the 5-year land supply and all the LAN, but this is the way that our district, together with Colchester and Braintree and Essex County Council, are tackling the house delivering. This is the way that everybody wants to see development take place. The one thing that they always flag up to you is the lack of roads, education, medical and green infrastructure. Yeah. This will deliver all of that before any house is actually been delivered. You know, there's going to be all the goodness, and I repeat it, I've said this so many times before, a new link road between the A120 and A133 is going to take traffic away from Clingo Hill, traffic out of the villages along the A133 coming to Clacton, and it's going to be a win-win situation for everyone. So I do applaud officers for having got us to the way that we have, and I look forward now to this very important next stage of this very, very important national importance project, Chairman.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Carlo said there, actually, because we're now sort of at the crucial point with this. We've talked about garden communities, we've talked about the rough area, but up until now it's been blobs on maps, a sort of a rough idea in a rough area. And now, as we go out to consultation, we start to put ideas out to the public about what the thing could actually look like on the ground. And it's really, really important that people take part in that consultation process. It says in the report, but the consultation is 13th of November to 8th of January. As I think Kath was saying there, that's extended because of the Christmas and New Year holidays, so to give everyone a full opportunity to engage. We want as much engagement as possible. This is, a real new radical way of delivering homes, and we want to see ideas. We want to see different thoughts about how we can achieve things. So the rapid transit system that's sort of sketched in on there, we don't know what that's going to look like. We have no idea. That could be anything. We're talking about something that's being developed for the future. It could be a technology that isn't even invented yet. Who knows? I'm really excited about the Garden Communities project. Also slightly nervous, a bit anxious, because if we don't pull it off, if it fails, that puts massive pressure on the rest of the district as to where we're going to fit all those houses in that we're going to have to build somewhere. This is the way to build houses. As Carlos rightly said, it's infrastructure-led, and it's going to create not just houses, it's going to create communities, sustainable communities with employment, with all the support services they need for themselves and for a wider area. So I think it's a really exciting new prospect for the future. Anyone else? Right, it's been moved and seconded. Are we happy to agree that then? Yeah, agreed. Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much. That's carried. So, next item. I'll use my glasses tonight.
173.
Page 173, item 6. Yeah. The housing land supply. Ewan.
Thank you, Chairman. And I think just in advance of consideration of this report, members, with your forbearance, a couple of points from me. This is my first local plan meeting as the new director. And I very much recognise the importance of engaging effectively with you as members on sensitive matters, and no more sensitive than housing land supply. And can I apologise to members for the lack of early and clear discussion and communication on this matter recently. And assure you that it's my intention that moving forward that there's a very positive and constructive working relationship sustained, because I think we have that at the moment, and indeed strengthened moving forward. The report before us tonight provides an update on the Council's ability to demonstrate a 5-year land supply. Since the publication of the report, however, new and I think potentially significant information has come to light following advice that we have received from a barrister who is supporting the Council in relation to other appeals. And this advice relates specifically to 3 issues that I think should be fully considered when reporting an updated position to members. As taken together, they may have an impact on the Council's ability to demonstrate this housing land supply. The advice, in summary, if you will, and I don't want to go into the detail of that at the moment, but the advice that we've received is that the Council should take into consideration appeals decisions which have been issued following further development proposals, additional information that's become available in relation to the deliverability of sites that are in the emerging local plan, and new statistical information which has been published this week, which we feel we need to take into account and properly analyse. And understandably, I think members have also come forward with a number of questions in relation to housing supply, and in addition to the points that Councillor Everett has actually well articulated this evening and our other speakers. And of course, as you all members will know and appreciate, that we still haven't yet got to the outcome of the legal position in respect of Centenary Way, where we have made an application for a judicial review, and we await Council's opinion regarding the decision on Sladbury's Lane. Having looked at this and taking a step back for a second, I'm confident that the methodology we use to determine the land supply, as agreed by committee in January, is robust, and it was based on expert advice. But I do think it's important to take the matters that I've just outlined for you into account. I feel it may be prudent for members to ask officers or to consider asking officers to review and update the report that you have before you, in order that you have the fullest information from which to consider and debate the Council's position in relation to the housing land supply. And on that basis, what I would say is that if so minded, we could have a further report reflecting this new information and the legal advice we've received for a further meeting as early as possible, and possibly in advance of the next planning committee, which I think is an important position.
Thanks for that, Ewan. I appreciate that. And just for the benefit of members to clarify what you just said, I had a meeting this afternoon, and it was literally just a couple of hours ago, with Ian and Martin and Ewan. And the meeting was kind of interrupted with an urgent phone call from Kath to Ewan. And so, you know, this news is kind of breaking fast, and it's very much a movable feast. And as a result of that, and as a result of what Ewan has just said, we've had barristers' advice that kind of could be very promising in respect of some statistical data, a report that was published yesterday, literally, wasn't it? And in respect of his opinion on other issues that have taken place. I'm going to move a different recommendation. I've got copies of it that I'll get handed out, and then we'll discuss it. But if I read it out to you whilst they're being passed around, and I apologise, this is very last minute, but it literally is something that we were discussing just a couple of hours ago in Ian's office at the Town Hall. So I'm moving a different recommendation, Joy, to the one on the agenda. I'm moving this. You'll get a copy of it. I'm going to read it out for the benefit of the public. So I'm going to move that the committee confirms that the Tendring District Council methodology for calculating the housing land supply, as agreed by members in January 2017, remains sound and should be relied upon and continue to be used by officers. Confirms its strong support for the Council's challenge to the decision relating to Centenary Way. That the committee notes that Council's opinion is awaited regarding the decision relating to Sladbury's Lane. Notes that there may be a significant change to the Council's housing supply position arising from new statistical data and from advice received today from Council relating to other appeals, and therefore instructs officers to prepare a revised report having regard to each of the above to be considered at a further meeting of this committee to be arranged as soon as practicable. And also that the Leader of the Council and Chairman of the Committee writes to the Secretary of State for Housing regarding the concerns of this committee on this issue, and that both local MPs are copied into the letter. Specifically on that last item, we have the concern expressed by many people that we could have a situation where developers are getting planning consent and then not developing that land deliberately so that it doesn't count against our housing land supply. So they can say, you still haven't got a housing land supply. Even if we say to them, well, hang on, you've got permission for 500 houses there or 1,000 there, they can say, well, I'm not planning on developing them anytime soon. And that situation is simply not credible and it's not tenable. We need to be able to do something about that. I think as a district, we recognise our responsibility to deliver houses. We've played our part of the game. We've done our bit. We're leading the country in terms of the garden communities. Literally, this is the biggest garden communities project anywhere in the UK. Government are supporting us to the hilt on that. We're doing our bit. Absolutely, don't think we're not. But it is really, really depressing and unfortunate for us as members, for you as residents, for officers defending it. And at this point, I'd just like to pay credit to our planning officers who get a pretty hard time. Poor old Gary over there, who went into bat pretty much on his own, on behalf of the council and on behalf of everyone in the district, really, to defend our decisions at appeal. It's a very lonely job for him sometimes, and we do appreciate what you do for us, Gary, and Kath and everyone in the planning department. It's tough out there, and it's getting tougher. And when so many variables are beyond our control, it does make you wonder sometimes what is the point of us, having any planning powers at all. Whilst we have planning powers, I think this recommendation that I've just moved presents a sort of way forward. I think that the mistake perhaps I've made in my own mind is talking about a 5-year housing supply, when really we should be talking about a housing land supply and then looking at the figure. Whether we have 5.1 or 4.8, whether we're just over the line or just short of the line, isn't a black and white thing. If we can prove 5.1, for example, and we're just over that 5-year supply line, doesn't mean that we can then turn down every planning application we want to turn down. And likewise, if we're just short of it at 4.8 years or 4.6 years or 4.2 years, it doesn't mean that every application is going to get approved. Where we see appeals that have been successful as opposed to those that have been unsuccessful, where we've relied on good material planning considerations like design and style and impact on the community, green gaps in particular, we've been successful. Where we simply rely on saying we've got a 5-year supply and then that's been picked apart, we've been unsuccessful. There's been some unfortunate decisions. We are going to judicial review on the Centennial one. We're awaiting Council's opinion on Slabridge Lane. And we'll take robust action on both of those to the full extent that we're recommended so to do. Hang on a second, Joy. I'll come to several people in a minute. And then, as I say, we've got this new information today that could be quite interesting, that ties in a little bit with what Councillor Everett mentioned in his statement at the beginning there, which is, I think, quite an interesting way forward. I'll take the speakers, and I think, Joy, I'll take you first. Joy, go on. You're on the floor.
I just want to make an amendment to this to ask why Slabridge Lane can't be included at the same time. It could end up saving money doing two for the price of one. I attended the hearing for 3 days, and they rubbished a team of legal experts headed by a QC, completely rubbished our experts' figures. The judge obviously accepted them, made no notice at all of the boundary settlement and the green gap, which Gary really fought hard for. For 2 years, this has gone on for 2 years. Another year is going to be taken up with this judicial review, and I don't see why we can't have that included in it. If you look at the 132 houses, of which it's estimated 60 are going to be built, this site, the builders, the application said they're going to widen the road. They can't because it's got all houses in it. They've got the size of the pavements wrong. They've got the size of everything wrong. Before a brick is laid, a developer has got to pay £130,000 for a bridge, the bridge in Slabridge Lane to be reinforced. they've got to get some form of underground drainage because the place floods. It's just not viable. If I were a developer, I would touch it with a barge pole. So that can't be included in the 5-year thing, can it? So we need it sorted out. And why not do the two together?
Okay.
I'd like to ask.
Okay. I've referred to both of them in the recommendation. Yeah, the Centenary Way application, we've already had Council's opinion, and he has recommended that we do go to judicial review, and that process is already underway. Sorry, my phone keeps ringing. The Slabbers Lane one, we've asked Council for opinion on that, and we are awaiting his response. But they are completely separate. We can't just do a sort of 2 for 1 deal. They are completely separate, so we do have to deal with them separately. We've got the go-ahead from a barrister. I mean, if the barrister comes back and says there's no point pursuing Slabbers Lane, we would have to be obviously mindful of his recommendation. We can't just go down a blind alley. And the reasons for contesting the Slabbers Lane one undoubtedly will be different. You just mentioned a whole load of reasons why you think it should have been turned down that only apply to Slabbers Lane, that wouldn't apply to Centenary Way. So, Jeff was next, and then Carlo. Battery issue, perhaps.
Get the duff one. Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I welcome the comments made by Officer at the beginning of his statement. Clearly, there were a few among us who were less than impressed, and we appreciate the comments you made. I think they're excellent. The motion that's been put forward by the Chair of the Committee, I think, is far better than the one we were looking at previously. It's much more detailed, and I think we're all pretty pleased to see that there's some positive news coming through at last. It's really good. I do believe this will help. Also, following up on what Joy said, I think it's really important that we look as hard as possible at judicial review in the case of Slabbers Lane as well as Centenary Way. They're both very important, and they bring up, although one issue the same, they do bring up slightly different issues as well, particularly with relation to the OAN. So I think that's quite important too. But I think this is a step forward, and I applaud most of all finally, something that I've been sort of suggesting for a long time, that councillors could perhaps get together, speak to MPs and maybe even the Minister, because I sympathise so much with officers. When you're getting inspectors coming back with completely different answers to almost identical situations, it must be an absolute nightmare to try and work with that. And I really don't know why we have to put up with inspectors who have absolutely no knowledge of our area telling us who do what is right and what isn't, and it seems to happen too often and too clearly. We've had it too much. The inspectors just seem to be a law unto themselves, so I'm really pleased that we're making that step forward. It's a really good move forward. I'm quite happy to second that motion, and I hope we can push this one through and get this sorted. Thank you.
Well done. Thanks. Thanks, Jeff. Carlo.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Of course, I do welcome the latest development in this. As you said, it is a moving feast, and information rolls in as we speak. I think really we've got to go to the bottom of why inspectors are suddenly becoming more scrutinising than what they've been up until now. They are under a huge amount of pressure from government to pick any holes that any refusal carry with them because of the massive amount of pressure they have of wanting to deliver these 1 million homes before the term or whatever end of election that might be. I think, the first item of the guiding community just goes to show, we are very serious about housing deliveries in Tendring. We are very, very committed to delivering homes in the right places, with the right infrastructure and with the right supports. To nitpick on whether we got a couple of weeks more or less on the 5-year land supply is simply nonsensical, Chairman. It is something that, I do applaud the way that we've tackled this, and I do hope that, for Joy and the residents, that Council advice comes back with wanting to challenge that as well. In my book, as far as I'm concerned, the methodology that was used to calculate the 5-year land supply was absolutely spot on, and I've got to pay homage to Councillor Everts for having been probably the most arduous scrutiniser of the lot of them. In fact, it would give an inspector a run for his money. But I've got to say that the methodology used was absolutely spot on. Whether with a couple of weeks more or less, it doesn't really matter. What really inspectors should be taken into consideration is the wider picture of what we're trying to do with the garden communities. And that's really a very, very important factor to take on board. We are not against house deliveries. Whether the inspectors are under enormous pressure from their chiefs to ensure that applications are not picked, it is quite frankly intolerable, Chairman. And I'm very, very pleased that we've got a new recommendation, and I do welcome to an update as soon as it's practically possible, so this committee could endorse that and move on in the right direction for the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Carlo. Ivan. Thanks.
Thank you, Chairman. And echoing those comments from Carlo, because Councillor Bray, you're just going to have to realise that now it's the government, your government, who is actually putting the pressure on councils. The government that said localism would be the decision maker at local level. When Eric Pickles brought in the MPFs and then told you what you'd got to deliver, not what you wanted to deliver, what you've got to deliver. And we're now facing another white paper from your government, where we might be actually having to come back and increase them again, because they're talking about 749 houses a year on the white paper, which the consultation finished today, which you'll see later on.
Another week.
Well, it was this month. Sorry, this month. So we might be back here. We might be back here again because of the government. The question I'd like to ask the chairman is if we could have some idea of what this significant change is, because we're voting on something here, which I don't know. We're talking about significant change from advice received today, where we're now going to look again and come back with a report. Well, can we have some idea of what this significant change is? Just an example, because we are voting on something just on words of significant. I'd like to know what that actually means in real terms.
The reason I'm being...
There's a next one. We're going to judicial review or High Court or whatever. Can we have have we had an idea of how long this will take for a decision to come from that, and how long it's going to take before we get there, and how does that affect ongoing issues of planning applications and developers coming forward during that time? How do we stand with that, with this challenge open at the moment, that it's predicted that this housing supply is not in line with what it should be?
Okay. Coming to the first question you asked, Ivan, about the significant change, I think the reason that I was being a little bit coy and that Ewan was perhaps being a little bit coy was just because the barrister's advice relates to advice he's giving on an appeal that has not yet been dealt with. So his advice is very much sort of legally privileged. But it's about about what information can be included in the calculation of the housing land supply. So if you noted Richard Everett's table, for example, he'd taken a different view, should we say, on what could be included as to what officers are taking a view on. And it could be, I'm not going to say out loud that Richard's right and officers are wrong, but it could be that a different view is taken about what is included. I appreciate I'm talking in riddles a bit, and I apologise for that, Ivan. But given that it's a public meeting, I'm just a bit sort of nervous about, and Ewan may well feel more comfortable in explaining more, or he may not. And regarding your other point about the JR, the Judicial Review of the High Court, and the timescale, the answer is I don't know, and I'll ask Ewan if he knows. As I understand it, what would happen is if the Judicial Review is successful, the Judicial Review is based on the fact that we're kind of saying that a point of procedure has not been handled correctly, for example. If a judge rules in our favour, it basically means that the appeal will then happen again. So that doesn't necessarily mean that the judge isn't going to necessarily, the judge isn't going to say that's it, the planning commission has refused. He will simply open the appeal up again to a whole fresh appeal. But I'll let Ewan flesh it out a bit. You may not want to.
No, thank you, Chairman. I think just on the point about the significant information, I think it is, as the Chairman outlined, I think this legal advice is pointing us towards consideration of what's emerging, what's coming forward, and our new an understanding of where some of these sites are at in the development process, where they've moved on in the last 4 months. And also that obviously there are appeals that have been upheld, which we haven't considered and included in the figures. So there's a bit of work for us to do on that, I think, to take a view and come back to you on. And certainly in terms of the judicial review, there's not a timeline for that, but certainly it's not a long process, and within the next 4 to 5 months that should be bottomed out.
5 months.
Yeah.
Go on. On the report, Chair, it does say on page 179, the Council had received legal and professional advice that warned against making overly optimistic assumptions about such sites without sufficient evidence to inform such assumptions. So we were warned.
We had sufficient assumptions.
But we were warned before we went ahead.
Well, it's always a matter of judgment, isn't it? It's always a matter of degree. In fact, I think we've been very cautious. In fact, Councillor Everett's been arguing that we could have agreed a 5-year supply earlier by his way of calculating it. He said we could have done it ages ago. We took a view that was different to that, based on Officer recommendation, and now developers have tried to pick that apart, and it turns out that the planning inspectors agreed on the basis of how quickly some of these sites are being delivered. That's where the difference lies. Our methodology is correct. It's just the figures that are input are being sort of slightly modified a bit. It's always a very inexact thing. I mean, the difference between 5.1 and 4.6 in numerical terms is not that much. It's half a year. It's 0.5, isn't it? But it just sort of sways the pendulum slightly against us. I think we've got a good recommendation here before us to try and make the best of this. And I'm certainly happy to commend it to committee. Joy, did you want to come back?
Just quickly, listening to what Carlo was saying and you, yourselves, Mr. Chairman, sorry. We've all got the message that the government are bound and determined, whichever way they can, to deliver as many houses as they can. 2 years ago, we were looking at 12,000 houses or something. I think it's going to be a lot more now in the end of it. Is it time now to think of a new settlement? Last week on the SLEP, we were told that the 120 is going to be expanded, jewelled, really made into something, well, it should be a fast motorway or whatever. Is that the place, the 120 corridor, to build a new settlement and get rid of all these upsetting ones for local people that are already struggling and get a new settlement there? Wouldn't that please the government as well? It happened after the war. I mean, my family were living in a four-bedroom house, four-floor house with 5 families, 1 toilet. And the answer was to build a new settlement, and we moved to Watford, or they moved to Watford. It works, and the government then is bound to have to produce doctors, schools. They have to. And it doesn't upset...
Joy, I don't know if you missed the entire previous item, but that's exactly what we're doing. Garden communities.
Oh, well, who said that, Carlo? Did Carlo say that?
I just said it. That's exactly what we're doing. It's a whole new settlement. All right, okay. Sorry, anyway. Anyone else? So, my recommendation then, as you've all got copies of it, I'm happy to read it out again if anyone wants me to. It's been moved by me, it's been seconded by Jeff, thanks. We're happy to agree that? All those in favour? Yeah, any against? That's clearly carried, thanks. Right. Okay, thanks. The next item is item 7, page 255, government consultation.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Gary.
Well, we've just had a little bit of discussion about the government wanting to build more houses, and here is evidence of what they want to introduce anyway. The government has published a consultation document containing proposals that it's considering implementing to speed up housing delivery. For a while now, it's been a top government priority. And the government is concerned that the houses aren't being built quick enough. and there are a number of measures within this consultation document that they are suggesting will assist with that. Now, the consultation document itself starts from page 263, and you have a full copy of it within your agenda. Now, the purpose of this report is for the council or the committee to agree the council's response to this consultation, which is due next week. And from page 307 of your agenda are a series of draft responses that officers have drafted in response to the various consultation questions, and the purpose of the report is to inform councillors of those issues and to seek agreement to our formal response. If I just highlight a handful of the main proposals within here, the first one, which is perhaps the most alarming, is that the government is concerned that it's taken a very long while for councils to work out how much housing they need. It's costing a lot of money for consultants to work out figures for that. So what they are proposing is a standard method for calculating housing need, which is based on statistics from ONS, in effect, so a government agency. And instead of being locally derived and locally worked out, in fact, these new figures would be effectively the government's figures, but with an uplift on top of those figures to take account of the fact that the government wants more housing to be built. So, in effect, for tendering, and the government has published a whole schedule of what they think the figure would be for all of the councils across the country. And for tendering, the figure comes out at 749 a year, which is almost 200 more than the figure that we think is correct. So the problem with this is we've already got a number of developers, when it comes to appeal, actually suggesting, oh, you should go by these new figures because that's clearly what the government wants councils to do. But of course, it's a consultation document and we need to get our response in. So if you agree with the recommended response on that, I think we should probably be objecting to that. And the issue with this is that it goes completely against the concept of localism, because effectively you've got a government agency dictating what the figures should be. Another problem with it, it doesn't take into account the very specific demographic issues that affect tendering, which Mr Smith-Day is all very well aware of, having attended most of these meetings, the unattributable population change. It takes no account of that at all. So the draft response within here is to object and to point out that issue. Another element of this government proposal is very keen on neighbourhood planning. And one of the problems that's happened with neighbourhood planning is a lot of communities are very reluctant to get involved in neighbourhood planning because it's unclear what it means and what they can achieve from it. And when they see developments approved in their communities that they're against, particularly when they're approved by the planning inspector that they're against, I think they wonder what's the point in trying to prepare a neighbourhood plan for our area if the government's going to dictate where the development goes. So what they're suggesting here to assist those communities, that actually the district council through the local plan should specify how much housing is required in their particular area for them to then make decisions in their own area about where that development goes and what form of development it should be. Now, in principle, my advice to members is that that's probably quite sensible, and actually we've been trying to do that for years through the local plan. And there's also an issue in here if councils fall into the position where they haven't got a 5-year supply and you have to judge planning applications on their merits, they're suggesting that you apply a proportionate approach to how much development is acceptable in different parishes. Well, that rings a bell, doesn't it? Because that's what we've been trying to do for years and have been overruled by planning inspectors on a number of occasions. So my kind of flippant response to that almost is yes, we support that, and it's something that this council has actually tried to spearhead in the past, only to be turned down by planning inspectors on appeal. The third proposal here is to assist councils in complying with the legal duty to cooperate, which has confused a lot of councils over the years, that councils should be compelled to enter into a statement of common ground with its neighbours, which sets out very clearly where there are issues that are agreed and sets out very clearly if there are issues that are not agreed between different councils. And I think this is a perfectly sensible proposal and something that we've already been doing with our neighbours across the North Essex communities. So in principle, I think we would want to support that because it's something that helps to demonstrate to an inspector that we are working together as councils. Whereas in the past, I think councils have struggled to demonstrate that to an inspector, and they've been bringing along buckets full of minutes from hundreds of meetings that have taken place over the years. If you can simplify it and come up with a simple statement that both councils can sign, then that seems like a sensible suggestion to me. Viability assessments. Now, the government is quite concerned, understandably, that you get a lot of developers getting planning permission or being offered grant of planning permission by the committee, but then arguing that their development is not viable and unable to pay for various bits of infrastructure, unable to afford the correct amount of affordable housing. And then they come back to the councils and ask them to consider viability. Then you have to go to an independent advisor on viability, which can cost a lot of money, take up a lot of time and delay the development process quite considerable. What the government is suggesting here is that if you've tested viability through your local plan process, then there should be no need to test viability on individual planning applications as they come in. If a developer can't comply with the requirements of the local plan, perhaps they shouldn't be getting planning permission, is the suggestion. And I think in principle, officers suggest that that's something we could probably support, because I've got first-hand experience of dealing with viability issues on development sites, and you never reach an agreement with the developer as to the viable level, even if you've got independent advice telling you that a site is viable. Very often you've still got the developer suggesting it's not. It's a very dark art, and I think this cuts away with all of that, so it's something we should probably support. And the other one that I want to highlight in there are various proposals in here, but I've highlighted the main ones, is proposals to increase planning fees. And the government is recognising that planning departments across the country are struggling quite a lot to deal with the workload. And so they're suggesting that actually the planning fees, i.e. the fee that a developer pays to have their planning application determined, could be increased by 20% to provide extra funding so that the authority can have enough planning officers in place to do the job. But they're only really offering that incentive to those councils that are prepared to take more housing development and those councils that deliver increased levels of housing. So I'm suggesting in here that we might want to object to that on the basis that actually sometimes it's those councils that are struggling to deliver housing that need more resources to deal with the overwhelming level of planning applications. Yeah. So if they're going to increase fees, it should be done across the board. The questions, the detailed questions, are contained in the consultation document, and from page 307 you have the officers' specific responses to those. And I don't know if members have had an opportunity to read through those, and I don't know how much detail you want me to go into those. Other than to say that they're here. But in effect, I'm suggesting that we object to the government's proposal for a standard methodology for housing because it doesn't reflect the truth of statistical data and it's not democratic at all. That we support proposals for statements of common ground between different councils and also for... What's the other bit here? Yes, so statements of common ground to cut down the amount of time spent trying to demonstrate that you've cooperated with your neighbours. That we also support the proposal that if you've tested your local plan for viability and your policies are viable, a developer shouldn't need to try and convince the council that their scheme is not viable. And in terms of the planning fee increases, that we object to that unless it is applied to all councils, irrespective of how well they're doing in terms of housing delivery. So the recommendation on page 256 is that the Local Planning Committee considers the draft response in Appendix 2 to the Government's Planning for the Right Homes in the Right Places consultation proposals attached as Appendix 1, and agrees the Council's response, which will be sent to the Department for Communities and Local Government before the deadline of 9th of November 2017. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Gary. Nick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I agree with this totally, I just say, Gary, and I was really impressed with most of your responses. I didn't know they were yours, but I was saying the council's. I was pleasantly surprised at most of them. I would actually like to propose, Mr. Chairman, that we have a working party from this committee of no more than 5 of us, with one senior officer in attendance, and that we get our responses, which I imagine most people would agree with most of the responses here, but there are 1 or 2 other responses I think we could possibly put a local slant on, which I think is necessary, and that we have it all this to you and yourself by midday on the 8th, which is the Wednesday. This doesn't have to go until, I think, 11:45 p.m. on Thursday night, following day, so that it can be then sent off by email. And I'd like to propose that as and then obviously that would then fulfil the recommendation in this report. But I do think this committee should have a bit more of an input than just nodding it through on tonight.
Yeah. Carlo?
Yes, Chairman, likewise. I'm very impressed with the reply that Gary and the team have put together. I do have 1 or 2 things I would like to add, especially on the neighbourhood plans. It's great. And Gary's responses really reflect very much what us members have been saying all along. Neighbourhood plans are so incredibly complex to get off the ground. And I've got to say that the one parish or town council which I thought they could have dipped their toes in it would have been Friends of Walton. And even they found that completely, it's just too complex to go about it. But it's, you know, I've attended my previous life in my previous life in planning. I've attended several seminars and conferences on neighbourhood plans, and you've got to have a referendum. You've got to have a committee of 21 people without elected members in it. You've got to once you've got all these people, the district council are then going to make a resource available for the neighbourhood plans working group to be steered and guided by. This is all expense, again, falls on a very cash-strapped district council. So I think we really need to bolster up. I do welcome, you know, that it is the right way, the neighbourhood plans, but we really need to simplify, and we need really government to simplify the process on which neighbourhood plans are actually being put together. Without forgetting, of course, you cannot constitute a neighbourhood plan until the local plan is up and running. That's another, kind of negation, if you like, of government. You know, on one hand they tell you yes, neighbourhood plans are good, but then unless you've got a local plan in place, you cannot have a neighbourhood plan. So we really need to fine-tune that. There is another 1 or 2 things. I do welcome Nick's suggestion that maybe a small working group could be set up if this is allowable within the rules that we have in front of us to just add Chairman's discretion to just add a few things together with Gary or any officer that from the planning department that would like to support. And if that's the wish, Chairman, I would like to second that.
Okay. Thank you, Carlo. Joy?
Could I just quickly ask, how would non-parish and towns who don't have, like Clacton, facilities to do consultations, will that be dealt with separately or?
Go on, Colin.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a parish area. It could be any area. This is that much has not changed right from the offset from 2011, 2012 when they were first thought of. Any group can constitute themselves, even in a parish area. It doesn't have to be led by the parish council or the town council. any group can be constituted to form a neighbourhood plan. So in Holland, the Holland residents or whatever, it's could put themselves forward and, with the help of the district council, then constitute a neighbourhood plan group.
Okay. Go on.
I didn't explain myself very well. Who pays for it with these local groups that are not got a town or parish council to pay for it? That's what I meant, really.
Pays for what?
Residents' Association.
Chairman,
Go on.
Yeah, there's not the expense comes once you start getting. There is, in examples of where I've actually seen neighbourhood plans go off the ground, the early runners, as it were referred to. There is people in communities which either are ex-planners or planning consultants, which they lend their expertise for free to the group. And having said that, where that doesn't happen, then the district council must make resources available to the group to constitute and helping them off the ground. The only expense that comes eventually is when the referendum has to take place, because it involves mailing. It's got to be done by post, Royal Mail, and all sorts of things. So that's where the expenses start to mount up.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Jeff?
Thanks, Chairman. I did take the trouble to look through the answers that you put in, and I was quite surprised at how many I agreed with. It was most of them. I agree with Councillor Turner. It would be an excellent idea to bring in a working group to give us a little bit more say on that. I cannot see why we should not be able to do that. We have time, just. And I think that the most important point is the answers that we put in so far in general are mostly right. A couple we could alter, but they do seem to err on the side of localism, which I absolutely support. Because let's be honest, the more control government has over planning decisions and local housing decisions, the worse it is for the local area. And that, with the greatest respect to the member opposite, is true whatever the colour of government.
Right, so we've got a proposal to set up a working group or working party of some kind to make any final adjustments to these recommendations before the deadline, which is a week today. A week, that's right. Week today, which is tight. Carlo?
Yeah, and for the benefit of other members of the committee, that should be circulated around via email, and any other comments from other members to be taken into consideration. Okay. But it's going to be a very tight span of time.
I'll go to Martin for a bit of guidance.
Yeah, can I suggest, Chairman, in terms of, there is a tight timetable, obviously, but it's a good idea for members to have the opportunity to feed in further comments. I would suggest that you need, as a committee, to delegate perhaps to the leader, the chairman of the committee, to actually agree the final submission to go off, and that there's no reason why you shouldn't. I mean, clearly a working party, I would suggest you should, rather than call it a working party, which means it has to be broadly political balanced and all that sort of thing, I would suggest that any member of the committee who wants to contribute to that should be invited to do so, either by email or by coming along to a meeting, which of course we can arrange so that effectively is a working party with just a single meeting.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to exclude anyone from it, nor would I want to sort of start drilling down into proportionality rules, because that gives me a headache on a monthly basis as it is. But I think Martin summed it up well there. Basically, anyone who could make it. So if we agree that, and I'm happy that we do, and I think there's a lot of merit in it, rather than thrashing through every single point here. And congratulations to Gary, because I think it's an excellent report, and it's a really good basis upon which hopefully it shouldn't take too long to go through these. An awful lot of these are just going to be rubber stamped. There's some, I think, where members might want to have a discussion. I'm happy if Nick wants to chair that. I'm happy to propose that Nick chairs that little group, and any member of the committee is entitled to come along and give their opinion. And I think if we can set a date for that to meet as soon as possible, and I'm not suggesting right now,
quite quickly,
but you know, as soon as possible after this meeting, to be emailed to all members of the committee, then I'm happy to do that. Does anyone else want to speak on that? If not, we'll go to the vote then on that basis. Are we happy to agree that? Agreed? All those in favour? So that's carried. Thanks. Okay, well done. Thanks, Nick.
Pleasure.
So item 8 is Local Development Scheme 2017 to 2020, page 325. Who's leading on this one? Kath?
Thank you, Chair. The next two reports that we're considering tonight are both sort of procedural matters, really, about how we deal with the development plan document. So the first one, which starts on page 325, is about the local development scheme. The local development scheme is the sort of timetable that sets out the process and the timing of developing local plan documents. We have an adopted local development scheme, and we're just bringing this back to you this evening because the existing scheme assumes that in terms of the development plan document for the garden community, we will launch straight into the preferred options stage. And the report that you considered earlier, if you remember, I described the issues in options stage. So we thought as officers that actually it would be helpful to add that early stage of consultation to improve the level of community engagement and community consultation. So this report is a minor tweak to your existing local development scheme to add in an early opportunity in respect of development plan documents in general, and the example we're looking at the moment is for the garden communities. So the recommendation, Chair, on page 325 is that the Local Plan Committee approves the Local Development Scheme 2017 to 2020, which is attached to Appendix 1, to have immediate effect and agrees to its publication on the Council's website.
Thank you, Kath, and I'm happy to move that.
Second that.
Second that. Right, are we happy to agree that? Yeah, that's the code.
Question, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I noticed the MMO creeping in. Have they now become statutory consultees on things? Sorry, Maritime Management Organisation, a new quango, and they're trying to find a role for themselves, and therefore they're treading on a few toes. To put it in very blunt English, yeah, they are. They are hard. So, another one to watch.
Okay, thanks for that clarification, Kath. The next item 9 is proposed amendment to the Statement of Community Involvement on page 349.
Thank you, Chair. Along a similar theme, really, the Statement of Community Involvement, again, the Council has an adopted Statement of Community Involvement. It sets out how we will undertake publicity, neighbour notification, community engagement in relation to plan making and also development management matters. The adopted scheme at the moment doesn't talk about development plan documents specifically. It deals with the local plan, and we might be able to deal with development plan documents under that umbrella, but actually we thought it would be clearer to have a section that sets out what people can expect in the way of publicity and community engagement for development plan documents, such as the garden communities document. And so, again, this is a minor tweak to that to include that sort of detail, and we're suggesting that it follows almost exactly the same pattern as we would for a local plan, so those various stages of engagement through the usual channels. So the recommendation for this report is on page 349. So it's that the committee approves the proposed amendments to the SCI to include details of consultation arrangements for the preparation of the development plan documents as contained in the report, and also that the amended Statement of Community Involvement is subject to public consultation for at least 6 weeks, so that's the statutory requirement, and that you delegate authority to the Head of Planning Services in consultation with the Chair to make minor amendments following that public consultation, subject to there being no significant objections. So the implication of that is if there are, then we would bring a report back to you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kath, again, and I'm happy to again to move that as printed and as just articulated by Kath.
Yeah. Chairman, I just would like to clarify on the garden, North Essex garden community specific. Is Colchester Borough Council doing the same with their local plan to update their community involvement scheme as we have done? The simple fact is that there is going to be joint issues such as, I don't know, bin collections and grass cutting and such like, you know. Is Colchester Borough Council doing the same as what we are? That's my question. Well, and if they're not, can we suggest to them that they do? And if they haven't, when is the next local plan committee so that they can add it onto the agenda?
Yeah, please, go on.
Well, I can confirm they are undertaking the same consultation as we are in relation to the development plan document, and we're working together at those events, and we're publicising exactly the same information. And I'm not absolutely certain, but I believe they are also making a change to their statement of community involvement to reflect that.
Go on.
Can we ensure that we communicate that with them? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I moved the recommendation. Jeff?
Joy.
Jeff seconded it. Joy, did you want to...
The community engagement, are we concerned at all about all the opposition to the garden villages in Great Tay, for example, and so on? There's huge opposition, isn't there? We're not... Pardon?
Well, we're in the blissful situation that is outside the boundary of this district. And I think it's unlikely to come to a head anyway for some time, that particular site. I think in respect of garden community development, the one in Tendring is likely to be getting the go-ahead to be proceeding much quicker than that one, probably. So whether that one fails or succeeds doesn't impact upon our one, fortunately. So, you know, it doesn't really affect us, is the sort of cruel answer almost. It's not that we don't care, but we don't care. No, but it doesn't totally affect us. Yeah. I need a second. No, Jeff seconded it. It's been moved. Happy to agree that recommendation. All agree? Thanks very much. Well done. Item 10 is response to public consultation on the publication draft local plan. Kath?
Thank you, Chair. Back in June of this year, the Council approved the publication draft of the local plan to be published for consultation and submitted to the Government for inspection following that consultation. That process has all happened. There's no decision to make in terms of this report for this committee because the decision to submit was made back in June. However, we thought it would be helpful just to highlight brought in very high-level terms the outcomes of that consultation for information for this committee. So this report summarises briefly the position. During the consultation, which took place in June and July, we received 542 comments. 130 different individuals made those comments. So that was to Section 2 of the local plan. And then there were 115 from 37 different consultees to Section 1 of the plan. Having said that, a lot of Section 1 consultation responses will have gone to either Braintree or Colchester because it's a shared part of the plan. So it's sort of slightly hides some of the Section 1 comments if you just look at the ones that Tendring received. Overall, the number of comments, and certainly the number of negative comments received, is drastically down from early sort of rounds of consultation, so far fewer objections being received, and the number of sort of big issues is narrowed as well. So the two main issues are firstly around housing land supply, so that will be no surprise on the back of the discussion that the committee's already had this evening, and particularly objectively assessed need, so developers who would like, or landowners who would like their land included in the plan. Clearly one line for them to take is to suggest that we need a higher objectively assessed need, and they'll be able to challenge that through the examination in January. And then in terms of site-specific policies, the site that generated the most objections was actually the land south of Thorpe Road, Wheeley, so the land that sort of wraps around this site here. Although the numbers were relatively modest in terms of local plan proposals. So, as I said, it's already been submitted to Government, and we're expecting the examination to start second or third week of January next year.
Thanks, Kath. The recommendation is that we note the results of the consultation outlined in the report, and I'm happy to move that we do. I would say that the numbers there are incredibly small compared to my memory of last time we were in this situation. And we went to public inquiry for the last local plan, Nick will remember. It's about 2005, something like that, 6, bloody long time ago. And we had over 3,000 objections to one site at that point going into public inquiry. So we are in a much better position than we were then. I think that's fair to say.
This was a non-garden community from memory.
Anyway, been moved. I've moved it. Carlo seconded it. We have to agree that? All agreed. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Which brings me on to item 11, which is comments on Colchester Borough Council's draft local plan consultation document, page 389. Kath, do you want to? No, Gary. It's you. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. While Tendring was undertaking consultation on its publication local plan, Colchester were doing the same in relation to theirs, as were Braintree. Having worked very closely together, obviously particularly on Section 1 because they're identical, but also in terms of working together on Section 2 under the duty to cooperate. So we were consulted, Tendring was consulted on Colchester's local plan, and fortunately it was no surprise that as officers we didn't find any great issues with the publication draft, and we submitted comments in consultation with the Chair during that consultation period. But we've brought those back here tonight for members of the committee to ratify those comments. And I've summarised them on page 391, they're in the report there. Just saying that yes, we have worked closely with Colchester. Transportation is a particular issue of joint concern across the boundary because obviously most of the people arriving or leaving this district have to come through Colchester unless they leave by sea. The provision of rapid transport in the Colchester-Tendring borders area will be really important, both to link into the town centre for Tendring residents as well as Colchester residents, and also back out. That the recognition that actually the growth and health of Colchester town centre is important to Tendring residents because it's that much bigger settlement. A lot of our residents look to Colchester as that sort of high level centre. Similarly with sports facilities provision and again welcoming the sort of approach to climate change and green space, etc. The letter itself is attached as Appendix 1 to the report, but the recommendation, Chair, is that the committee endorses the response provided by officers as set out in the appendix and delegation to the head of planning to formally respond to stakeholder consultations in connection with local plan and policy matters going forward.
Yeah, sorry, Kath, thank you for that, and I'm happy to move that recommendation on page 389 as printed.
Just one moment, Ivan, and then Carlo. Just on the question of that transport, I believe the government are about to, and I should imagine that will have an impact on all these developments. The government's now going to come out with its air quality standards nationally, and they've also set up a joint air quality unit, and they're talking about road zero, I think the line is, so they're going to expect, I think, some background behind that. And because I saw in that the document we were talking about meet and park and rides. Well, we want to go further and just meet and park and rides. That's meet and park and rides means people have got cars, and we're encouraging cars again. Yeah. I mean, I didn't mention it in that document, but to me, it seems as if we're not. I know we were talking about automation earlier and how things are going to change. Over the next 30 years, we could have driverless cars, and there's a big debate going on at the moment about how we're going to cope with the different types of fuel. Diesel will probably go. We could possibly be looking at more electrical cars. They're talking about short-term gas. Where are you going to get that gas from? Because there's an issue about energy supplies at the moment. So there's the big issue is going to be around there, and I should imagine this will again sit in with it, whatever developments come out of those departments in government of what we need to meet, the obligations we'll need to meet on developing those future plans. But I don't think we should just think about, oh, there's park and ride, so let's do that. We need to make sure that we've got a decent public transport system. One of the issues coming up is as younger people are more and more going to find it more too expensive to drive, so there'll be less and less young people being able to rely on the car in the future because the insurance and the cost of it. So we do need to make sure that we've got decent transport. Again, I saw in the document earlier about we've got good transport, bus transport within the rural areas of Tendring. No, we haven't. It's unreliable, and it's actually, they stop routes when they feel like it, and they can. There's no obligation to run those routes. So we haven't got good, reliable transport. So there does need to be a really harsh look at the future of supply of transport and reliable transport. If we're going to encourage people to use it, it needs to be reliable, and it needs to be cost effective and clean.
Joy?
Based on what Ivan was saying, it's just come to me. I just wonder if we could agree with the panel, with the committee, for all of us to have a long weekend in Utrecht, in Amsterdam.
That sounds a good idea.
Because they've got the transport up to, they've really got the transport sewn up. Buses are there, one ticket for the lot. And so easy, anybody, even I can understand it. But it, seriously, somebody ought to go out there and have a look. If that's what we can achieve, that'd be great.
Okay, thanks for that, Joy. Carlo?
Yeah, Chairman, just an observation, and if someone has not proposed the recommendation, happy to. Once upon a time, if you remember back, the version of the plan that was proposing 6%, the biggest opposers were Colchester Borough Council as well as the County Council. And that's another thing I would like to point out in the government white paper consultation, how we've moved on from those days to where we are now. You know, not only we have fully embraced the duty of cooperation, we've gone far beyond, but to set up partnerships with them, you know, to set up a new settlement. You know, that's something I really would like to make absolutely crystal clear and very loud in once the working group meets, because that's something that not many authorities across England and the UK are actually doing this. We are very unique to our four of local authorities that have got together and worked together to produce what we've actually produced, you know. So that's something that, and it's just like the letter that from at the back of the appendices, it just kind of moved on miles and miles and miles from what it did a few years ago. So, you know, just an observation, Chairman.
Carlo, something I was going to say actually as well. You're absolutely right. We wouldn't be in this position if we weren't working as closely as we are with Colchester and Braintree and obviously Essex. But it's something we haven't done in the past. It's something that district councils are famous for not doing or doing incredibly badly, and that is working with each other. In the past, we had that sort of invisible parapets that we would peer over and point at them and go, there be dragons. It was a bit of an epiphany to me when, you know, we try really hard as councillors to attract jobs and employers to our district so they can provide employment for our residents. And it kind of dawned on me that, yeah, but actually, if an employer builds something over the border in Colchester and people from Tendring are having to commute into Colchester, it's better than not having a job at all. Yeah, ideally, we'd have all the jobs in Harwich and in Clacton and in Tendring. But if people in Tendring have got jobs and employment and they have to commute into Colchester, it's really not the end of the world. And actually, that's better than having no job at all. So working with Colchester has been a bit of an eye-opener, but you know, and it's not without problems, but you know, it's a compromise for us sometimes. It's a learning curve for them too. But I'd like to congratulate our officers and their officers for putting down their machetes, as it were, and coming together in the same room to work together, and for the politicians to do likewise for the greater good. And I think it genuinely has been for the greater good. And coming back to what Ivan said about transport, I agree with you, Ivan, actually very strongly. I think it's very difficult to plan for a transport system when you don't know what the vehicles are going to be looking like, how they, you know, whether they're going to be automatic, as in driverless, what sort of fuel sources they're going to have, therefore what sort of refilling stations are they going to need or not need. It's really, really difficult. And with the garden communities, as I alluded to that earlier, you know, we could be talking about technology that simply doesn't exist now. It will be the main staple in 30, 40 years' time of that garden community for people getting around. You know, if you look at some of the technology we have today that 15, 20 years ago you just couldn't conceive of, and we are going that way with cars and with personal transportation. Who knows what that rapid transit system might look like? I don't know, but planning for it is really important. The trouble we've got, especially in this country, is it takes so long from scoping something out to it actually being opened. Sure. The A120 from Stansted to Braintree being dualled, that was opened about maybe 10 years ago now. But that was agreed when I was at school, because I went to school in Dunmow, and I remember looking at the map, working out where my bus would be going. the new route would be taken. And I was about 40 by the time that road opened. I had left school, I would hasten to add. It took so long. The trouble is, though, we designed, a road had been designed for whatever that year was, 1984, but it got opened in 2007. So it's no longer fit for purpose. It's the M25. I got an email from Highways England yesterday that the new preferred route for the Lower Thames crossing has been agreed. And that will work. If it was open tomorrow, that might work tomorrow. But in 25 years' time, when it actually gets opened, it won't be fit for purpose anymore because we'll have all moved on. What the solution is to that, I don't really know, but it is something we do have to be very, very mindful of. Coming back to the motion before us, though, I moved... Go on, Ivan. No, come back.
To London Transport a few weeks ago, they're also looking, and I didn't see anything in here, when we're talking about building transport hubs and infrastructure alongside business. They're talking about land value capture now to make sure, if you're providing land and a good access to that land for a business to grow and profit from, then there should be some big... They're talking about that with Crossrail now. If you're linking different areas up, then those businesses or whoever is going to rely on that, there should be some capture there to actually help pay for that.
Yeah, something, if I may add, something Metropolitan Estates, when they put the Metropolitan line through, 19 crikey did.
Go on, Joy.
Another thing in favour of the Netherlands that you really ought to look at, the air quality out there in Amsterdam even is fantastic. Bikes. Every town, the bike is supreme. And if we could encourage more than that in the smaller areas, more cycle paths, Sustrans...
I agree with you. It's very difficult, though, to retrospectively fit cycle routes in. And when you get a cycle route like you've got in Colchester, where you're just painting a white line down the middle of the pavement, it's ridiculous, someone just said. They just don't work. You get run over because the little white man and the white bicycle get rubbed out, and you're walking on the wrong side, and an angry cyclist comes and mows you down. It's not very nice. You need proper dedicated cycle routes. Holland has the advantage, of course, of being flat because it's largely reclaimed land, so you don't have those nasty hills which a lot of cyclists are not very keen on. They're hard work. But I agree with you, and it's one of the advantages, obviously, of designing something from scratch, which we're doing with the garden communities, because we can at least embed cycle routes and that kind of thing into that. Okay, right. Anyone else? Roy?
Yeah, I agree. I don't agree with some of these cycle paths because, they have been put in and they completely ignore it. It's like the bus lanes in London. They're supposed to, the drivers of cars are supposed to keep out of those bus lanes, but do they? They don't, because I travel up to London quite a bit, and they just completely ignore it. You might as well not lay the damn signs down because you're just wasting your time.
Okay. So, we have before us a recommendation that I moved, Carlo seconded, as printed on page 389. Are we happy to agree that? All those in favour? That is carried. Thank you very much. So that's it. Thanks for coming. You'll be notified of this meeting of this working group, whatever we're going to call it, ASAP. And thank you all, officers, members of the public and members of the committee for your input tonight. Thank you.